Right, it's recording, excellent. So this is the third and final installment of Big Jewish Ideas, and we've had, God was very philosophical, Torah was quite mystical, and Messiah is going to be quite practical. And we're going to base our remarks mostly in the writings of the Rambam, although not entirely. And I need, first of all, to get the text. Here we go. Here we go. So I decided there's only a minimal amount of Hebrew text. I should say session 3, there you go. I failed to change, first mistake. Hope it's the worst mistake. But here we go. So the concept of Messiah is itself interesting. I mean, cynics or later thinkers will say that there's very little evidence for a messianic idea in the Torah itself, and the idea seems to evolve in Nevi'im and further in Kesuvim. And so, as you get through the later parts of the Tanakh, it becomes a more obvious idea. But actually delving, we'll find there are early hints to it, and our most well-known source is going to be the Rambam, but that is predated by a section of the Gemara in Sanhedrin. So the final chapter of Sanhedrin is called Chelek, and it's called Chelek because it starts with Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba. Every Jew has a portion in the afterlife, and as a digression from that, the Mishnah continues and it says, "Oh, this is a list of people who don't qualify, and one of them are people who deny the Messiah and similar kinds of kind of what's called eschatology, kind of the unfolding of the final moments of history." And this is an English rendition of the text. I've used the Sefario, which is the Steinsaltz translation, and that means that the dark text is actually the translation of the Hebrew, and the thinner text is interpolated for explanation. So Tana Rabban, the Gemara in Sanhedrin 97a says, Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Shavua Sheben David Bo, the 7-year cycle in which the son of David, that's a poetic name for the Messiah, will come. Boy, Shana Rishon in this Kaya Mikrazeh. In the first year of that cycle, the following verse will be fulfilled. The Himtarti Ali Achas, I shall rain down on one city. Ali Achas Lamti, but on another city I shall not rain. That's what's going to happen the first year. So there's a disruption to weather and to the crops which are affected by the weather. Shnir, second year. Chitzi Rov Mishtalachim. The pangs, it literally means the arrows of famine, are sent forth. It means it's selective. Shlishis, the third. Rov Godel. There will be a great famine. Anoshim v'anoshim v'taf. Hasidim v'anshe maisa v'torah mishtakeches. So, and it's going to badly affect and kill off men, women, children, pious people, men of deeds, and the Torah will be forgotten, mishtachas. Malom de'ahov, from those who learn it. But Revi in the 4th year, so there'll be plenty. Beina, so there, plenty, and there will be plenty, meaning there'll be kind of some kind of plenty. All right, but Chamishi in the 5th, so there God will great plenty, unbounded plenty. And people will eat, drink, and be merry, and the Torah will be restored to those who learn it. Vashishis in the 6th year, kolos, there'll be a lot of noise, right? It means voices will be heard. It means there's all sorts of noise, rumors, sounds. Shavias in the 7th year, milchomos, there'll be wars. But Moitze Shavias, in the year following the Shemitah cycle, then David Bo, the son of David, will come. Meaning that after a cycle of years in which these things unfold, the first year of the new cycle will be the year in which the Mashiach comes. So the rest of the text I decided not to include in the Hebrew, so here it is in English. It is taught in a brisa. So brisa is material which is contemporaneous with the Mishnah. The Rebbe Naharai says, during the generation in which the son of David comes, youths will humiliate elders, and elders will stand in deference before youths. And a daughter will rebel against her mother, and a bride against her mother-in-law. And the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog, and a son will not be ashamed before his father. So the first part of this source, this here, the first, let's get my little dot back. The first part, this text here, talks about climate change, disturbance to weather conditions, and to crop growth, erratic economy, and eventually rumors, wars, and finally the arrival of the Messiah. This talks about the generation in which the King David comes. There'll be an inversion of the rules of society. Youth will humiliate elders have to stand deference for youth, and so on. And the most famous one is Pnei Hadar Pnei Kelev. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. We would call that the tail wagging the dog in a modern English idiom, meaning that everything will be inverted. The world will seem not to be right. There'll be something very wrong. And this is like a harbinger of the Messianic era that is going to come. Here's some more. It is taught in a brisa. Rabbi Nehemiah said, during the generation that son of David comes, arrogance will proliferate, and the cost of living will corrupt people. The vine will produce its fruit, but nonetheless the wine will be costly, and the entire monarchy will be converted to the heresy. I like this interpolation is put there by Steinsaltz, and so he sees it as a polemic in the early Christian Roman era, and there will be no inclination among the people to accept rebuke. People will be impervious to rebuke. The Brisa supports the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says the son of David will not come, and the entire kingdom will be converted to heresy. So it gets worse and worse. World. So this is now, an inversion of societal norms. This is climate change, political instability, and this one appears to be spiritual instability. The sages taught in a Brisa. Further, the verse states, "For the Lord shall judge his people and atone for his servants, when he sees that their power is gone and there is none shut up or left." The phrase "their power is gone," it's derived the son of David will not come till informers will proliferate. Alternatively, the Messiah will not come until the number of students of Torah diminishes. Alternatively, the Messiah will not come until the pruta will cease in the purse, meaning no one's got any money. Alternatively, the Messiah will not come till they despair from the redemption. People have given up hope, as it's stated, and there is none shut up or left, as though there were no support or help for the Jewish people. And finally, in this section, the school of Eliyahu taught, and this source is well known, you may have come across it before, 6,000 years is the duration of the world. 2,000 of the 6,000 are characterized by chaos, 2,000 Torah, and 2,000 the period of the coming of the Messiah, meaning, and that's the tradition that the world will last for 6,000 years, and by the time we get to the year 6,000, the Messiah must have come. So these are selections of Gomorrahs. So you can see that the Talmud, at least in this passage, sees it's not discussing what happens when the Messiah comes. It's talking about the world prior to the Messiah, political, agricultural, religious instability, an inversion of social norms, corruption, persecution. There were no support or help for the Jewish people. But the last source is saying, but there is an end point. There is a maximum time before this will happen. One of the things that characterizes these sources is they're not actually very helpful to having any idea at all about why the Messiah might come. Although you can derive it will be presumably you'll need a Messiah to sort out all this mess, the political and all the other mess. Maybe that's the purpose of the Messiah, nor how the Messiah will come, nor how one will identify the Messiah, nor what will happen when the Messiah comes. Just a few things that are missing. If we turn now to some more sources, here's a bit more Gemara. Again, I decided because of the volume of text just to leave it in English. Rabbi Yochanan said, if you saw a generation whose wisdom and Torah studies something diminish, is steadily diminishing, await the coming of the Messiah. And it quotes a verse. Rabbi Yochanan said, if you saw a generation whose troubles inundated like a river, await the coming of the Messiah, and so on. Rabbi Yochanan said, the son of David will come only in a generation that is entirely innocent, in which case they'll be deserving of redemption, or in a generation that's entirely guilty, in which case there'll be no alternative to redemption. So here we place it to kind of, as it were, God makes a promise, and if God makes a promise, it'll have to happen. So there comes a point at which either the Messiah will just come automatically because everyone is so good, or there'll be an alternative to avoid destruction. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to Elijah, because he just happened to be chatting with him, because that's what we do. He's chatting, that's Elijah the prophet. When will the Messiah come? Elijah said to him, go and ask him. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked, well, where is he? Where's he sitting? Elijah said, at the entrance to the city of Rome. And this is part of a tradition that sees Rome and the Messianic ideal in conflict with each other. That the Messiah, as it were, that is born and becomes the leader of Rome is the, if you like, anti-Messiah as far as we're concerned. There are lots of Christian references here, as you'd expect. Many of these rabbis are writing in the early Christian era where they've been badly affected by Christianity and certainly know about it. What is the identifying sign? How do I recognize it? Because he sits among the poor who suffer from illness, and all of them untie their bandage and tie them at once. But the Messiah unties one bandage and ties one at a time. He's healing two people at once. So he attends to the poor, he cleans them up. You know, these messianic tropes appear in Christianity as well. He says, perhaps I will be needed to bring about the redemption. Therefore, I will never tie more than one bandage, so I will not be delayed. Meaning he's waiting just in case. He's able to drop everything and reveal himself as the Messiah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi went to the Messiah. He says to the Messiah, greetings to you, my rabbi, my teacher. The Messiah said to him, greetings to you, Bar Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him, when will the master come? The Messiah said to him, today. Then later Yeshua said, Levi, what? It came to Elijah, and Elijah said to him, what did the Messiah say to you? He said to Elijah, the Messiah said, greetings, shalom to you, Bar Levi. Elijah said, he therefore guaranteed that you and your father will enter the world to come, because he said, shalom. The Messiah lied to me. As he said, I'm coming today, he didn't come. Elijah said, this is what he said to you. I'll come today if you'll listen. Meaning I could always come today, but you've got to be in a fit state to come. So these sources bounce between a world which will be so hopeless that the Messiah will have to come to save it, and a world in which the Messiah will only come if precipitated by human behavior. Again, Rav Nachman says, if the Messiah is among the living in this generation, so he's a person such as me, who already has dominion over the Jewish people, and he was a leader, and their prince shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from their midst. I mean, it's someone already there. One can't imagine someone saying that today. Oh, you know, if the Mashiach is around, it's got to be me. And then Rav says that the Messiah is among the living, it's a person such as our Saint Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. If the Messiah is among the dead, this of course does not mean, as some people suggest, the Messiah can come from the dead. It means if we had an example of someone who's no longer alive, who could have been the Messiah, it means Daniel. That means Daniel the prophet. That phrase, Ish Chamudos, the beloved man, comes from the book of Daniel. By example, he says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is a contradiction. It's written in one place, the Messiah will come in its time. And it's also written, and I will hasten it. So what does it mean? Will it come in the appointed time, or will I speed it up? They seem to conflict with each other. Rabbi Alexandria explains, if they merit redemption through repentance and good deeds, I will hasten the coming of the Messiah. And if they do not merit redemption, the coming of the Messiah will be in its designated time. Which takes us back to what we saw in the end of the previous page, that there is a last point. We can precipitate the coming of the Mashiach, but there is a point beyond which he will come irrespective. So these, I'm just going to remind myself how much of this there is. Okay, so the Gemara, and I'm going to actually just return to come off screen sharing for a bit. The Gemara is characteristically vague about the details. Do you get a sense from this Gemara whether the coming of the Mashiach is a miraculous occasion? Is it a miraculous event? What do you think? You'll have to take yourself off mute if you wish to answer.
It seems more every day rather than miraculous. Doesn't have any sense of spectacle in what you've read.
Right. There's actually very little about the coming of the Messiah. These sources are mostly about the conditions into which the Messiah will come. And the Messiah seems to be, but they're right, we have a Messiah sitting at the gate. He seems to be a doctor. He's healing people. He's poised to there, and he'll come any day. He's still sitting. I mean, he's still sitting there at the gates of Rome. This is not, you know, he's still sitting there. It doesn't mean he's actually physically there. If you read this source literally, you probably have misunderstood it. But if you disregard it, you probably also misunderstood it. but it doesn't convey a very strong miraculous. There are other Gemorahs, the Gemara Megillah, which says that the temple will descend from the built sky. That's a more miraculous type event, but it's also not describing the coming of the Messiah. The building of the temple is a post-Messianic phenomenon. So any other thoughts or comments about this point? What kind of occasion is it? Mostly pointing, what's the purpose of the coming of the Messiah? Not all at once. It's not entirely clear, but I think we can derive from the sources on the first page that if the Messiah is going to come into a world of chaos, where there's political, economic, climatic, and other chaos, presumably the purpose is to sort it out, put it to rights. That's the implication. But exactly how that might be, and how it might be performed by miraculous or political or other means, religious chaos, a world full of heresy, a world in which there's things are topsy-turvy and the elders have to show respect to the younger, and these sorts of things, the tail wagging, remember, Pnei Dog, Pnei Kelev, the face of the generation, like the face of a dog. We would say the tail wagging the dog in a modern idiom. All these things suggest that we're talking about a world of decline, of political, economic, societal decline, and the Messiah comes into this world to somehow save, improve, rectify it. So with that in mind, I'm now going to return to the text, and the text we're looking at now is the most famous text really ever written on this subject. Now, the Rambam, in his Laws of the Kings and Their Wars. So the Rambam's magnum opus, we can argue whether it was the Moreh Nevuchim, but certainly his halachic magnum opus, was magnum opus in Hebrew is the Yad, the Mishnah Torah, which is a comprehensive code of Jewish law derived from the Gemara. And right at the end, he has a section called Hilchos Malachim or Milchamo Sehem, the Laws of the Kings and Their Wars. And right at the end, the very final two chapters of the entire enormous work are devoted to the concept of the Messiah, which he regards effectively as a halachic construct, otherwise he wouldn't have put it here. And this is not the entire thing. I've missed out some sections, but it is so interesting that I felt it was worth looking at in some detail. Excuse me. Sitting in the garden, you see. Excuse me. Now, in chapter 11, and I'll point out any anomalies as they arise. And the Rambam very much takes Diana's view on this, which the coming of the Messiah is not a miraculous occurrence. It's certainly not overtly miraculous, and appears to be part of a political or military process. The King Messiah would arise, so what's his job? To re-establish the monarchy of David, and we understand the Messiah is a descendant of King David. You remember the beginning of the Gemara. Dorish ben David Bob, the son of David, the scion, the descendant of King David, as it was in former times. What's his job? He will build the sanctuary, that's the temple, gather in the dispersed of Israel, i.e. complete the process called kibbutz golios, the ingathering of the exiles. All the early statutes were restored as they once were. So there are many laws of the Torah that we have not been able to observe since the destruction of the Second Temple, including the offerings, many agricultural laws, some of the laws of purity. And the job of the Messiah will be to restore Jewish law to its full observance. Sacrifices will be offered, the sabbatical and jubilee years will be observed as commanded in the Torah. Anyone who does not believe in him, or one who does not anticipate his coming, not only denies the prophets, but also the Torah and Moses, our teacher. The Torah has given testimony about him, saying that the Lord God will return your captivity and have compassion with you. He will return and gather you. We read this just before Rosh Hashanah. It's Parshas Nitzovim. Read it on the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. If any of you should be dispersed at the ends of heaven, from there God will gather you. From there he will fetch you. The Lord your God will bring you. These matters are explicit in the Torah and include everything said by all the prophets. So the first part is to say, what is his job? His job is effectively restoration, to restore the people to the land of Israel, to build the temple, and to re-establish full observance of Jewish law. Oh, and by the way, if, as so many, this is much like a protest against those who say this, there is no trace of this idea in the Torah, no, you're wrong. This is something which the Rambam understands to be native to the Torah. You might have to dig around a bit. You might have to have a look in the poetry, but you will find it. And if you deny the concept, you're not denying the prophets, you're denying Moshe as well. Now, I missed out Law 2 because it was kind of a bit of a digression. Law 3 very much touches on what we've said so far. It should not occur to you that the King Messiah must bring wondrous signs. It's important to note the Rambam does not waste a single word. And if he articulates it like this, it is because there are people saying exactly this, and he is refuting a position that he has not explicitly admitted to. It should not occur to you the King Messiah must bring wondrous signs or perform marvels or invent new things or revive the dead or anything like what the fools say. It is not so. That's not his job. He's not a miracle worker. He's not a magician. For Rabbi Akiva, one of the wives of the sage of the Mishnah, was King Ben Kozibar's arms bearer. Who is King Ben Kozibar? Answers on the postcard, or certainly with mute off. Who is Ben Kozibar or Kozibar? Who? Can't hear you.
Bar Kochba?
Bar Kochba is the correct answer. That's correct. Shimon Ben Kozibar was probably his real name, and Bar Kochba is the name by which he is the son of the star, right? That's how he became known. That's his nickname. His actual name was Shimon Ben Kozibar. And he was, you know the story, it's the Roman occupation. We're in the 130s, Roman persecutions, and the Bar Kochba arises. Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues for a while believed he was the Mashiach, and things went wrong. But Bar Kochba was not a miracle worker. He was a successful, at least for a while, successful general. So he uses this as a proof that don't make the mistake of thinking that he has to be a miracle worker. No, he's not a miracle worker, because Rabbi Akiva thought Bar Kochba was bad, and he was a King Messiah. All the sages of his generation thought that he was a King Messiah until he was killed because of his sins. Meaning, it doesn't mean he died for his sins. That's not a Jewish idea. It means he died, he's like any other person who'd sinned, and he died. And when he died, then they recognized that he could not be the Mashiach, because unfortunately some part of the Jewish world even today haven't caught on, but if someone dies, they can't be the Mashiach. It's a simple concept. Since he was killed, then they understood he was not the one. The sages never asked him nor sign nor a wonder. So the essence of the matter is like this: the laws and the statutes of the Torah never change. You not add to them or detract from them. Anyone who adds or restricts, etc., etc., etc. The purpose, and this is very much an anti-Christian polemic, but the anti-Christian still hasn't started yet. Which is, don't think that comes along to make any changes. It's probably an oblique reference to Matthew, changing no jot or tittle. Jesus comes and says, "I'm not going to change anything," but Christianity developed very much in the direction of changing and fundamentally altering the way the Torah will be observed. Do not think that's the job of the Messiah. It obviously has an anti-Christian dimension. Now, let's see how it works. What's the mechanism of the arrival of the Mashiach? Now, if a king should arise in the house of David, who is versed in Torah and engaged in commandments, as is David his forefather, and according to written Torah, and he enjoins all of Israel to follow in his ways, and encourages them to repair its breaches, and he fights the wars of God. So he's got to come from the house of David. He has to be a Torah scholar of some import. He is successful in leading some kind of repentance of the people. So he encouraged the Jewish people to become observant, and he fights the wars of God, which we presume means that he is a general, and is able to restore political sovereignty for the land of Israel. We're not quite there yet. Then he may be presumed, that's called the Chezkas Mashiach. The person then is a presumptive Messiah. If he succeeds in his efforts and defeats the enemies around and builds a sanctuary in its proper place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely Messiah. Then he is Mashiach Vadai. Then he is definitely the Mashiach. That's it. No miracles. He has to be a spiritual, a religious, and military leader who succeeds in doing set A, he becomes presumptive Messiah, set B, definite Messiah. But if he does not succeed in his matters or is killed, we will know that he was not the one the Torah has promised. He is merely to be considered like all the other exemplary and qualified kings of the house of David who have died, meaning he was a good guy. He has a role in history, possibly precipitating and eventually contributing to the eventual arrival of the Mashiach, but he's not the Mashiach. God set him up to try the masses, and this is a difficult philosophical issue. as it says, and some of the wise will stumble. So why do these people arise? Well, God tries people to something its own, which I'm going to leave. Now, if you buy a Rambam that was printed any time between about 1600 and about 1970, the text stops here. And the reason for that is that the Rambam now goes on to talk about Jesus and a little bit about Muhammad and explain why they are not qualified to be the Mashiach. And certainly for a large part of European Jewish history, Christians had control of the presses, and they were not willing to allow Jews to publish certain texts that they thought were uncomplimentary or defamatory about Christianity for understandable reasons. And that means that I have several versions of the Rambam, and in the standard print editions, this section is omitted. However, it is known from manuscript, and it was certainly in the original, and most of the modern editions have put it back. And it's of great interest, and you can see how it fits, because he's talking about Mashiach's, messiahs who were not successful. So even Jesus the Nazarene, who imagined he would be the Messiah, was killed by the court, was prophesied about by Daniel. What's the prophecy of Daniel? It's not such a complimentary one. Also, the children of violence among your people will lift themselves up to establish the vision, but they will stumble. Was there ever a greater impediment than this one? All the prophets spoke of the Messiah, Redeemer of Israel and Savior, and Gatherer of the exiles and strengthener of the commandments. But this one caused the ruin of Israel by the sword and the dispersal of its remnants and its humiliation and reversal change the Torah and cause most of the world to worship a God other than God. It's not, he doesn't really pull any punches. You can imagine very well why Christian censors would not have been terribly excited about allowing this text to go out, and so on. He's obviously writing it he's not just writing an anti-Christian polemic, it's in the context of understanding the notion of Messiah and why the most obvious contender or the most widely touted contender alternative does not qualify. But he's not finished yet. Nonetheless, the thoughts of the creator of the world beyond any man's understanding, for our his ways and our thoughts are not his thoughts. That's a quote from Isaiah. And all the doings of Jesus the Nazarene, and he has a bat here as well, and that of the Ishmaelite, i.e. Muhammad, who came after him, are nothing but to pave the way for the King Messiah. So this actually is a very important idea, that the Rambam says we don't know how God works. And what Christianity and Islam have succeeded in doing is spreading the notion of the Bible, of revelation, of Messiah to a very broad audience, albeit in a form that Judaism cannot validate. So they have a role. We don't understand why God did it this way. What's their role? To prepare the entire world to worship God together, as it said, for then when they will realize their messiahs were false, and they will abandon them and turn to God's true Messiah. I will turn to the peoples of pure language, they make all call upon their Lord, serve with one consent. How is this so? And he elaborates on the contribution of Christianity and its false Messiah and Islam. The world is now already filled with matters of the Messiah, matters of the Torah, matters of the commandments. Meaning Christianity and Islam have, for whatever divine reason that we don't know, have been a vehicle for the dissemination of ideas that are central to our beliefs. Knowledge of these matters has spread to the distant islands, and many nations of those with uncircumcised hearts. They discuss these matters and the commandments of the Torah. Some of them say these commandments were once true, but have since been cancelled for our times, and they were not meant to be observed for all generations. What's that referring to? Christianity. Some of them say these secret matters are not simple as they would appear, and now the Messiah has come and revealed these secrets. That's a more Islamic approach. But when the true King Messiah will rise and succeed, and he'll be lifted up and raised aloft, they all will immediately return and will know their fathers left them an erroneous legacy, and their fathers and prophets led them astray. I think we can probably agree that if we were, let's say, in early post-medieval Europe and in control of the printing presses, we would probably not, and devout Christians, we're probably not too enthusiastic about disseminating this text. The Rambam writes it entirely as an academic level as part of his explication of what the Messiah is and what it isn't. If you really want to know what the Messiah is, you need to know what it isn't, and here's some good examples of what it isn't. So that's like part one. But there is part two in what the Rambam says as well, before we have a little time for a bit of a discussion. There's not so much more text here. So the Rambam here, that's the end of the 11th chapter. Here's the 12th chapter. And this touches on it. Is this a miraculous event, or an event which may be divinely controlled, but happens in a natural rather than supernatural manner? It should not occur to you that during the days of the Messiah, a single thing from the ways of the world will be cancelled, nor will there be something novel in the creation. Rather, the world will continue in its customary way. So the world will be the same. Now that which is said in Isaiah, when it says, the wolf will live with the sheep and the leper shall lie down with the kid. This is what we read this on the last day of Pesach, is a parable and a riddle, meaning don't take it literally. This is very much the Rambam's approach everywhere. Reading these kinds of poems literally leads you down the wrong path. The substance of the matter, it's an allegory that Israel will dwell in safety with the wicked of the world are compared to wolves and tigers, as it says, etc., etc. But they will all return to the true religion, will not steal and not destroy. They will eat of the permissible foods comfortably, meaning the lion will eat straw as ox. It means that everyone will be able to coexist in a civil manner. And so similar matter about Messiah parables. In the days of the King Messiah, everyone will understand these parables and what these matters will compare into what was hinted. Now, the Rambam, one of his greatest critics, is against literalism. He dislikes literalism. He believes that it leads people down the wrong path. It robs poetry, beautiful prose, of its intended meaning, and ends up encouraging simplistic, implausible explanations of the Torah and of the rabbinic literature. And this is a key example. Do not think, there's an old joke. Have you been to the biblical zoo? Oh, what's the biblical zoo? Well, you go there and they have a lion and a lamb, a cage. I said, well, that's very interesting. And what do they all sit together very nicely? He goes, no, but every couple of hours they put in a new lamb. That's not how it works. That's not what it means. In fact, I'll say it's not a very good joke, and I probably won't use it again. Our sages of there is no difference between this on the days of the sleep, the current reality, except for our observance of kings of the world alone. That's what Shivud Malchus, meaning that we will be politically and religiously autonomous in our own land, which is something which one can argue has begun. That's an interesting conversation related to how we understand Zionism and the advent of the State of Israel, whether we see it as a stepping stone towards a messianic revelation or part of it or not at all. There are numerous views, things we've spoken about before. But you can see here that the idea is kind of a political and religious autonomy, allowing us to govern ourselves and manage our religious affairs in accordance with the requirements of the Torah. And then there's a kind of conversation about various details, which I don't think I'm going to spend too much on. And there are regarding all these matters and similar. No one knows how it will be until it will be. Don't waste your time, right? For these matters were unclear to the prophets. Even the sages themselves did not have a tradition regarding these matters and could only attempt to understand the verses. Thus, there were disagreements in these matters. Nevertheless, neither the order that these events will occur, nor their details are fundamental to our religion. Thus, a person will never involve himself with the Agada and not dwell in the Midrashim regarding these or similar issues, meaning it's not a worthwhile endeavor to spend a lot of time delving into them and making them the focus of one's religious life. This is a blind alley religiously. And we see those people who do get obsessed with this stuff tend to be, let's say, a little bit nutty. He must not make them dogma. He doesn't mean that it isn't a dogma that the Messiah will come, because he stated clearly that it is. But it means getting too worked up about the details, right? How so? For they don't result in love of God nor fear of sin. Similarly, one should not calculate the end of the exile when the Messiah comes. There's all calculations. The Rambam, who lived a little bit after the Rambam, calculated it would be a number of years. Hence, Rambam says it's all a waste of time. Right? It's not a worthwhile endeavor. But most importantly of all, the sages and the prophets did not long for the days of the Messiah because they wanted to rule the world, or because they wanted to have dominion over non-Jews, or because they wanted the nation to exalt them, because they wanted to eat, drink, and be merry. What's the point of it all? Rather, they desired this, so they would have time for Torah and its wisdom, to live in peace, fully observing the Torah with all its details, studying, learning, implementing in an autonomous religious and political system. And there will be no one who will press them or force them to be idle from Torah, meaning political autonomy. This in order that they merit the world to come, as we've explained regarding laws of repentance. And then he goes on to explain what the world might look like. At that time, there'll be no famines, no wars, no envy, competition for the good will be very pervasive. And ultimately, we will understand the greatest mysteries of the world, achieving knowledge of the Creator to highest degree as humanly possible, as it says, and this is one of the most well-known and oft-quoted verses in Isaiah, for the earth shall be filled of knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And that is the end. In fact, that phrase is the very last line of the entire Rambam's magnum opus, the Yad Mishneh Torah. So, the Rambam's understanding is very much how Diana read the Gemorahs, which is that they are, it's describing a process rather than a moment. It's a process that we would experience in real time with real players, ostensibly using political, military, or religious devices that in theory are at our disposal now. It just hasn't happened yet. And there have been presumptive messiahs, and the Rambam's having a bash when he talked about presumptive messiahs. He recognizes that Rabbi Akiva and his friends had a good cause for thinking Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach, but they were very careful to abandon that belief at the point when he died. And later sources, of course, there have been numerous messiahs. He's referring obliquely to Jesus there, but he refers to Jesus anyway, explicitly later. And then there have been various, later false messiahs that people have believed in and have eventually disappeared and have never kind of delivered the goods. So the messianic idea, first of all, Judaism believes in a personal messiah. There is actually an opinion in the same Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think it's on 98, which suggests that there either isn't a personal Messiah, there isn't a Messianic era, or we fluffed it and it's too late, it isn't going to happen. Which, considering the Gemara was closed by the early 6th century, it doesn't give us much hope, because we're talking, the Gemara was in its current state at least 1,500 years ago. That's not the mainstream view, and that's rejected by the Gemara and the later sources. So we understand the Messiah, there's a Messianic era, and it is ushered in by a person. We have a constant person, the person who is the leader of this kind of religious stroke political revolution, but this person is a good leader, not a miracle worker. There are no signs, no wonders, no magic tricks, but careful, skillful, and effective political military leadership, but not in the ends of subjugation or control, but to establish an autonomous religious and Jewish political entity, which will be able to live side by side effectively with the non-Jewish world, to enable us to pursue the spiritual ends, which were, if you like, our lot. So that is the concept, certainly in the Rambam's writings. Any thoughts or questions on this?
Well,
Stuart.
Yeah. So I can't remember where it came from, but there's a concept somewhere about the Mashiach ben Yosef before Mashiach ben David. How does that fit into any of this?
So there is a reference, you're quite right. This is all about the person that we refer to as Mashiach or Messiah. And although we don't call the person in this title Mashiach ben David, we're familiar with that concept that the person must be a king that will re-establish the Davidic dynasty. We refer to the person in our prayers, David ben Yishai, and that it's clearly from. But you're quite right. In addition to that, there is a less well-known concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, of a Messiah with a different role, and this role is much vaguer. There is a reference in the Gemara to it. What appears to be is this is a military leader who lays the ground, but dies in battle at some stage in the early Messianic revelation, but it's not the person we colloquially refer to as Mashiach. Ultimately, the word Mashiach actually just means anointed one, which is translated into Greek as Christos, which produces the word Christ. Yeah. That's the chain of thought. So for Christianity, Jesus is the fulfillment of the messianic concept and comes to us through Mashiach, Christos, Christ in English. But the notion you're referring to is debated, and it's quite popular in Kabbalistic literature that, maybe we've been through the Mashiach ben Yosef phase, but of course the Mashiach ben David phase hasn't happened. What's the role of these various kind of messiahs, or less disappointing messiahs? But I really touched on it, and it would require really a whole class. But I'm pleased you raised it, Stuart. Thank you. Any other questions? You have to take yourself off mute, Jackie, if you want to speak. You're still on mute. What's going on here?
I think it's you.
You're off mute. Yes, you're off. You're fine. We can hear you now.
Okay, I was going to say, the lion might lay down with the lamb, but the lion is still going to be a carnivore. So it may not eat the lamb it lies down with, but it's not going to start eating straw.
Right, well, this is the point that the Rambam is making, that you need to understand there's an allegory. If you believe, as the Rambam says, the world will, as I said, will just carry on as it was now, lions will still eat lamb chops. And because of that, the image of a lion lying with a lamb is intended, it's an allegory, it's a parable, in which you understand that, you know, that we're the lamb, they're the lion, and while there's been a history of conflict, we'll now be able to live peacefully side by side. It's not talking about an actual lion or a lamb. They're poetic images. And that's once you go down the route that this is not referring to a miraculous time and the world will still operate the same way, then clearly a lion and lamb is an image. It's not intended to be something literal. And as we say, the Rambam is an anti-literalist, certainly in these sorts of sources.
But then they also say that the Mashiach will come after Armageddon, when the world really is a terrible place.
Well, it's interesting because we touched briefly, he mentioned it on a thing called the War of the Gog and Magog.
Yeah.
And the War of the Gog and Magog is the subject of the Haftorah, written on Shabbos Chol Hamoed Sukkos. And it talks, there's some kind of apocalyptic war. It's certainly something which is picked up on some of the tropes in the Book of Revelation and so on. Whether it's a real war or a conceptual war, whether it happens before or after, is it part of the Messianic revelation or precedes it? I don't know the answer to those questions. I'm not sure that anyone does. Has it been? There are those who want to say that some of the catastrophic conflicts of the last century were that. Some people say that's not credible. Who knows? The Rambam does, as we've seen already, recommend not talking about the details, the principle, the importance of the principle, belief in the principle, playing with the principle, but working out how it's going to happen in detail and tying yourself in knots. You know, many people, many famous writers try to work out when the Mashiach will come. Even the Rambam, one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest medieval philosopher after the Rambam, came up with the date. But there's a principle when you come up with a messianic date. It goes like this: pick a date that will be after you die. That's the first point. So if you got it wrong, you're not there, right? Pick a date that after you died, but it's not too far ahead, to make sure, so give people hope. So it's not too far in the future, but not too soon, that when you get it wrong, you're held to account. I'm sure they didn't actually work on that principle, but it does seem that how they often operate. They're always mysteriously about 70 years after the time the person's writing. Just too long for them still to be alive. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, I think we're done. So that is the third and in the series final big Jewish idea, the Jewish idea of Messiah. It's very different from the Christian Messiah, very different perhaps from some people think the Jewish Messiah. I also think that the Rambam has a particular spin which reflects the Gemaras, but there are more mystical approaches which I think are perhaps less appealing to us, but nonetheless have a different understanding of what the Messianic moment might look like. But I like the Rambam on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. There's no share. Next Wednesday evening is Tisha B'Av, and there is a full program. The programming, the education program is during the day of Tisha B'Av as always. There's a long class in the morning, and then there's my customary lecture, which is going to be on anti-Semitism and literature this year in the afternoon. They will be delivered by Zoom this year.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.